Look, does God want every single Christian to be so rich, to just have so much money that they're driving Ferraris, Lamborghinis, they got, diamond jewelry, all this kind of fancy stuff? Or on the flip side, does God want everybody to be so poor, right? Money's evil. Remember that, guys. Money, you shouldn't have any of that. Ugh, money. Funny enough, the pastors who preach those kinds of things themselves are not poor, but that's besides the point. Anyways, guys, so much information is given out there about should Christians be extremely rich? Should Christians be extremely poor? And well, donate to my ministry, and I'm going to tell you exactly what no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, you find so many false teachers out there misleading genuine believers to be ashamed that they have financial means, to be ashamed that they have material possessions. And then on the flip side, you have people glorifying the fact that they're rich. You want people to love their money and love their material things. Well, today we're going to be talking about what the Bible actually says on this, and we're going to jump into, Proverbs. We're going to talk about what David's perspective was when praying to God. So let's jump into it. 2 things I ask of you, deny them not before me, or before I die. Remove far from me falsehoods and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. Look at this. Poverty nor riches. Neither poverty nor riches. Just give me enough. Just give me enough food so I can be fine, I can be chilling, and so that I can glorify you, Lord, and tell more people about you, and to be a good worker for the things you designed me to do. Don't give me so much that I forget who are you, or that I struggle with pride and think I did it by myself, or don't take away from me so much that I would be tempted to steal or break the law and thus profane you. Powerful stuff right there. There's unique challenges in being given an incredible amount of riches. There's unique challenges in being given poverty, right? Ultimately, God is the one who does give and take away. We're going to talk about the issues with riches, the issues with poverty, and we're going to tie it back together. But the issues with riches, God who? Bro, I got rich by myself. That's a common thing, right? So many people don't want to admit the fact that it was only because of God, right? Out of the incredible amount of, or out of all the people that I know that have an incredible amount of wealth, because in my job, I talk to a lot of investors, a lot of people who genuinely have so high of an income that it would make most normal people pass out. Very few of them say it was all God. Very few of them understand the huge amount of blessing, and they say that they worked hard for what they got. They pulled themselves up from their bootstraps. Why don't the poor people do the same? Right? Not understanding that everything that you're given is given by God. Every opportunity. Right? God gives the opportunity for wealth. It's not just, all right. You know what? I had a little bit of starting capital before I made my business, and that was my money that I made, and then I created more with it. And sure, God blessed me through that, but it was my hard work. God gives you the opportunity and the ability for wealth. If God didn't want to, He could choose to take that away from you instantaneously. He can choose to not give you any more opportunities. God can choose to make you incredibly sick at whatever moment you choose to not understand that, right? Every single thing in the world is God's, right? Back in the day, God wrote it to the prophets, describing it in a way that they would understand, right? All the cattle on 1,000 hilltops, every single piece of livestock, every single piece of agriculture, every single stream, river, mountain, area of land ultimately belongs to God, right? Every single material thing throughout history belongs to God. Every single ounce of gold, every single gemstone, every single piece of food, potable water. If you want to scroll down to the molecule level, every single atom, proton, electron, even down to the quarks belongs to God. All of it. Even your skill set belongs to God, right? Oh, but you know what? God gave me these material things. God gave me this t-shirt. God gave me, this nice microphone. God gave me my computer. But hey, look, I was the one who used them to make money. I was the one who used this computer to trade on the stock market, to do this, this, and this. No sirree, Bob. That ain't it, Chief, okay? God even gave you and is allowing you to have every single one of your skills. If you got a high IQ, if you've got the ability to speak well, if you've got whatever it is, it's God-given and God allowed. David says in Psalms 135, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my hand forget its skill. His ability to play an instrument or to even use his hand in other functions is God-given. The even bit of opportunity that you have for the neurons in your brain to fire through and to send information out through each other is a blessing from God. There's lots of people who don't have those kinds of blessings. Lots of people who don't have the ability to read what I'm having here on the screen today. We have a huge privilege, those of us who lived in developed countries, who have access to the internet. We have a huge privilege to have the ability that we could sit down and learn to read, right? To not have bombs dropping before us, and to be taught in a more stressful, less stressful, but whatever kind of way, we've been taught to learn how to read, to have these kinds of skills. Now, with that being said, it is a responsibility of all believers to help the less fortunate, the poor, the needy, the naked, the crippled, the lame, the widowed, the orphans, etc. Either directly or indirectly, it is our responsibility to help the poor. Unfortunate that a huge push from political parties is these poor people, they just need to pull themselves up from their bootstraps, which I'll touch on in the next slide. But these poor people, man, they can help themselves. They can, they'll take care of themselves. Bro, we have to take care of them. If you have the ability, you have to bless others. You have to be doing your part in God's kingdom. If you're incredibly intelligent, you have to help those who lack that. If you have the ability to move around effectively, right? The neurons in your brain still move around the muscles. You have to help out the lame and the crippled, right? Like I said, either directly or indirectly, either paying and sowing into ministries that help out those people. And even in your life, when you encounter these types of people, show them the love of God and help them, right? 1 John 3 talks about, if any one of you having the world's possession sees a brother or sister in need and chooses to turn your heart to them, how can the love of God be in that person? That's a sign of a believer. Not that we're going to be perfect every single time. Not that I don't struggle. I'm not coming here from a high horse telling y'all what to do, right? I struggle with it too. Looking at the homeless and genuinely deciding, well, is this person going to use the money for food? Or is this person going to just cheat me, right? Stuff like that. There's a big difference between struggling with that and not caring about living in that sin. It's not a cool recommendation, right? It's not just excuse me, guys. Jesus wrote that in the last second. It's a commandment. I didn't write in Matthew 25, and Matthew 25 talks about how, basically paraphrasing because he talks in big length, but he's saying, whatever you've done or not done to the least of these brethren among you, you have either done or not done to me also. Jesus is speaking there and saying, you choosing to help the poor or you choosing not to help the poor is a reflection of how you choose to treat God's property. Ultimately, all people are God's property, right? Being a child of God, a different story, but loving your neighbor, that you're showing how much you love God, because all people are technically his property. And God's judgment and his discipline on the proud. There's tons of proverbs, man. Tons of proverbs talking about how people who get prideful, who think that they're the big cheese, that they're the top dog. No, homie. God's allowing you to have a certain skill set, to have a certain time with those kinds of things, right? Ultimately, you need to understand that, or it is God serving his justice to discipline you, or if it gets to the point to judge you, to take those things away from you, to take your health away from you, to take those opportunities away from you. And obviously, I'm going to kind of teeing up into the next slide, I'm not saying that every single time that God takes things away from you, it's a judgment, but oftentimes it is. It is a judgment on the proud. Right? Like Job. Job is a righteous man, and God allowed certain things to happen to him for the ultimate glory of God, right? So that we can read his story and that we can learn from it and we can understand from it. So not every single time someone is made poor, it's a judgment from God, but we're going to touch on that here in this slide. All right, so listen, I'm poor. I could just steal, right? Like, God, you made me poor. This is what I have to do. I gotta make money somehow, okay? Look, the needy are responsible for their choices, okay? If you're somebody who is poor and you go off and you steal, that is your fault. If you're somebody who's stuck in a jam and lacks things in some other way and you dishonestly gain those things, that's your fault, right? You're going to be responsible for your choices. 1 Corinthians 10 talks about how we're not going to be put into a spot of temptation beyond what we could bear. Excuse me. So it is ultimately your responsibility. Every single man who's put into a position where he has the opportunity to steal, he's at fault if he chooses that. Every single woman, likewise, in that kind of opportunity, she's at fault for doing that. And this isn't in some sort of callous way, right? I came from poverty. I came from a low-income environment, and loving and respecting my parents for what they could provide for me, I know that ultimately, all the people in my environment, there's a lot of people that I liked. Ultimately, when they chose to do things that were improper, it was their responsibility. It was their choice. But there's a big difference between being unable to work and being unwilling to work, right? Listen, I don't want to work at some sort of McDonald's burger flipping job, bro. I want to have a nice job. I want to have this. I want to have that. 2 Thessalonians talks about that. Talks about how if someone is unwilling to work, then they shall not eat. There's a big difference between saying, look, I don't want to work some low-level muck job versus genuinely having absolutely no economic prospects. And we have to be good stewards of our finances, right? In the opportunities where God gives you money, and this is me speaking from someone who's made poor decisions myself, when God gives you money, you have to be smart with it, right? That's I don't think that's the next point, but there's something going off the script here. We have to be smart with it, right? In the parable of the talents, basically there's a really rich guy who gives his workers amounts of gold, right? He gives one guy 1 unit of gold. He gives another guy another unit of gold, another unit of gold, right? And the case of the matter is, kind of summarizing it here, is that the guy who was given the least amount of gold goes and he hides it, and then his master critiques him because he hid his gold, and the master tells him, at the very least, you should have brought it to the bankers so that you could have earned interest on the talent, which is the unit of gold. Basically, the guy didn't go off and properly handle the money that the master allowed him to borrow. Same thing with us. All the money in the world, God allows us to borrow it. And there's a big difference between, hey, the baby formula was just way too expensive this month, and you choosing to go and spend money in unwise ways. All right. Same thing is on the flip side, right? That's a spending money portion of this, and the same thing is true for the earning money portion of this. Being unable to work or being unwilling to work. Are you too good for a nice little Uber job where you go and deliver sandwiches to people? You're too good for that, right? You're an idiot. You're an idiot if you think you're too good for this kind of job. If you're a man with a family, you have a responsibility to provide for them. If you're a woman in a position where you have to provide for your family, you're responsible to them, right? So on and so forth. Even if you're a single man or single lady, you are ultimately faced with this. Are you unable to work, or are you unwilling to work? Okay, so God's discipline on the slothful. Just like I touched on before, I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm not trying to be rude to people who are in low-income environments. That's literally where I came from, the hood of the hood, right? I was blessed enough to be in a hood here in the United States, and I was blessed enough to not get clicked in to any gangs. I mean, I did my fair share of stupid activities, And I can tell you that, poor and profaning your name, there's a lot of stupid things I did just to fit in, right? I didn't have to steal so that I could feed my family. Bro, I stole or I did these kinds of things just so that I could fit in with the guys who were clicked in, with the guys who really did bang, right? Just because I valued that type of social environment. That was my own stupidity, bro. I'll tell you the truth. That was my own stupidness. And so that's not even unable, unwilling to work. That's my desire to have material things. Right? I didn't have to provide for my family. I wanted to have these types of clothes. I wanted to have these types of things. And I made foolish decisions for that. And so God's discipline on the slothful or on the thieves, maybe that's the next one. Okay. So yeah, God's discipline on the slothful. If you have the opportunity to work and you choose not to work, God's judgment could be upon you and would be just to give unto you. So, plenty of verses in the Proverbs about the slothful, right? Just like a door turns on his hinges, the slothful or the sluggard turns on his bed. Or coming up with all these kinds of excuses of why you are not going to work, right? The whole little passage about the slothful man says that there's a lion in the street, that there's this and there's that, and he just makes up excuses, or he or she makes up excuses for not working. And there's consequences for theft in its various ways, right? Here it talks about the various ways: stealing, as in not giving somebody their due wages, and that can come from the employer to employee side, where it's an employer doesn't pay what they ought to owe, but also on the flip side, where an employee doesn't perform how they ought to perform. And even a third example, I guess, someone who owes money not giving money that they know that they borrowed, right? It's due on the first, you got to pay it by the first. Unless something crazy happens, you choosing to be lazy is not an excuse. But yeah, this specific example, because I could have done Exodus 20 and done the 10 Commandments, but this one here makes it a little bit more broad of a range. You choosing not to pay, and this is the rich example, but you choosing not to pay people who work for you, that is theft. And you choosing not to perform, not to work in a way that you're being paid, that is theft also. If someone pays you X amount hourly to do this and this, and you know you should be cleaning that fry cooking machine, or you know you got to be taking apart that ice cream machine and cleaning it when there's downtime, if your boss tells you to do something and you choose not to do it, which again, I'm not perfect at myself, I'm just laying out what Scripture says, and it should be convicting to all of us. But if you know what you should be doing and you choose just to sit around and your boss didn't say that's okay, that is theft. Now, there's consequences for theft in its various forms, whether that's cheating people in business, that can apply to both the poor, the poverty and the richest part. Oftentimes the rich extort people way more than the poor do, and it's just that power imbalance. But in all its various ways, if you steal, there's consequences for it. You should strive to have a God-honoring type of work, right? And those of us who are wealthy enough or privileged enough to affect systems and affect societies and things like that, we ought to be making a change for these things, right? I remember seeing a meme, this was a while ago, and this wasn't like a Christian meme or anything, but it was just like a comparison of two different mindsets. It was one mindset, and they're like, there's a family with a kid, and they're looking at some poor person across the street. The one person's mindset is looking at the poor people and saying, wow, telling their kid, wow, you ought to work hard and study hard so that you don't become like that poor homeless guy. And then the other family's mindset, the contrast one, is looking at that homeless guy and saying, wow, honey, you should work hard, you should study so that you can make the world easier for people like that. There's always going to be people who are super lazy and they just don't want to work, right? Those are probably the minority here. But ultimately, there's going to be plenty of people who just genuinely are not that smart, right? They weren't blessed with a high IQ. They potentially have mental deficiencies themselves, or there's going to be people who have physical deficiencies, or there's going to be people who were raised without their fathers, or there's going to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's going to be always people who have certain challenges. And the people who have the challenges, right, it's not their fault a lot of times it is, but a lot of times it's not their fault, but it is their responsibility to seek out need. And those of us who are privileged enough to have those things, right? If we're blessed with a high IQ or an ability to do this, or the ability to function, right, to use our hands and feet properly, or to do whatever, if we're blessed in that way, we have to use God's blessings to bless the less fortunate. It's not an if, when, whatever. It's something that God commands. It's something we should be doing either directly or indirectly. Sowing into ministry, or when these kinds of people cross our paths, we ought to be doing what we can to bless them, to show them God's love. All right, that was kind of long-winded, but just tying it up here, right? There's been plenty of people who have misinterpreted this verse, but I think this is a good one to tie us all up. It's not money is the root of all evil, it's the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. It's so sad. It's so sad when people fret about finances. And it's so sad when people have the ability to help out and they don't. It's such a sad thing. But we need to understand that God is with us throughout those things, those of us who truly know God. And we have to understand that without God, all of these things are meaningless. The social status, the vast amount of wealth, all the pleasure that the world brings is absolutely useless without a relationship with God. And thankfully, that's what Jesus accomplished on his mission. That's what he came here in the world to do, to die for our sins, right? All of us have broken God's laws, whether it's on the rich side, whether it's on the poor side, whether it's in some other side. We've all broken God's law, and we deserve punishment for that. But the good news is, the gospel, the Greek word for good news, is that Christ died for us. He died to give us the opportunity to have life in him. And for a more applicable example, the one we typically go to here, is the speeding ticket example. If we were guilty and before a perfect judge, we couldn't say to the judge, look, I broke the law here, but I did all these good things. The judge is going to judge you based off of if you did that or not. And we can have an opportunity to have life more abundantly with Christ, because it's as if the judge himself came down and paid the fine on our behalf. We just have to trust and accept Christ's sacrifice for us. If you have questions about that in particular, let us know in the comments or DM us on social media. But that's ultimately it. It doesn't matter. All this money, all these things, it doesn't matter if you don't have a relationship with Christ. So I urge you guys, if you don't know Christ, seek him out, right? Genuinely seek out the Lord. And those of you who do know Christ, pray that God helps you with this, to not desire poverty, to not desire riches in this sense, but to love the Lord with all your mind, soul, heart, and your strength.